Hello everyone and welcome back to Flute Tube. Since we're all here today and this just came in the mail, I want to start by showing you something I think my students will appreciate. I'll just cover a couple things here. This is a royalties check for a CD that I recorded back in 2004. I still get royalties, woohoo! And this is a check for $3.57 and I can go spend this somewhere. That actually is a good haul for me because I think if I sell a physical CD in the United States, I get about $1 per CD, maybe $1.07. If it sells internationally, I get 10 or 11 cents. And per streaming track, I get 5 cents. So I might get something like this check maybe 4 times a year. But anyway, let's go on to our topic for today now that we've had our little check-in with the reality of the music business. Today we're going to talk about the low register on the flute. I've had several requests for this by now, and that's not surprising. And it's a big enough topic, I've decided to break it into 2 episodes. Today we're going to talk about understanding how you should make the low register, what muscles you should use, what muscles you should not use, and what you're physically trying to do with the airstream. And then next week, when you've had a little time to think about that and process those ideas, we'll go on and talk about really conquering your low register, and I'll give you some things to practice to really train your muscles to get a great low register. In order to play your best in the flute's different registers, you really have to understand what makes each of them work. So when you're first starting the flute, whether you're a little kid or an adult beginner, it's really hard to get the high register and the low register. So you might be playing and trying to get the high register, and you can't get it. And so then maybe your teacher tells you, or you tell yourself, just blow really hard. And so then you go like this. And you think, oh, I just got it. That's what I have to do to get the high register. And then we spend years unlearning those habits of tightening up and blowing hard and blowing a lot of air. The low register is the opposite. It's really hard to get the air to go down the tube enough and get those low notes. And we can't get it to go down. And maybe we tell ourselves, or our teacher tells us, just blow really gently. And then we kind of like, oh, there it is. And so then we think, okay, when I want the low register, I can't blow too hard. I've got to be really gentle. But then the problem is, of course, what if you want to have a big, fat, resonant sound in the low register? Or what if you want to have like a really aggressive, edgy sound in the low register? You can't get it because you've trained yourself that to get the low register, you have to blow really gently. You have to divorce thinking of making these registers based on how hard you blow. What you're doing if you're thinking of blowing hard is you're thinking of air speed, but it's actually not the air speed that makes the register, and it's not even the air volume. The answer really is angle, the air angle. So if you think, oh, blow really hard and that will get my high register, what that really means is that you're blowing more directly out, kind of straight across. The lower you go, the air has to go more down, angling into your embouchure hole on your flute head joint. And it's true, air speed is going to affect those things if you don't otherwise control it. The faster your air is, the more it's likely to go directly straight out. The slower it is, the more it's going to trickle down into the flute. And so that is a solution because it changes the angle of the air. But we are in charge of the angle of the air ultimately with our embouchure. At this point, I want to show you something, but don't laugh at me because I don't actually own it, so I have to just show it to you on Amazon. I describe this to my students all the time, but I've never bought one to actually show them. But it's called the Numo Pro Flute. And you can see, obviously, it's to teach you to aim your air with your embouchure. So you're not relying on air speed or volume. You're aiming at these little spinning wheels purely with your embouchure. The point is, you really do want to become a master of exactly where you're aiming your airstream. Little do you guys realize, I'm sure, that what we're about to do is like fantasy fulfillment for me, because I talk to my students all the time about pretending that they're playing with a hose, but I've never actually played with a hose with my students before, and that's what we're about to do. So prepare yourself and enjoy this, because I'm going to, but also just know this is going to be some pretty shoddy, spotty camera work, because it's beyond my capabilities to play with a hose and deal with a camera right now. Okay, and the water's barely turned on, so almost nothing is coming out of this hose, right? So, if I want the angle of the water to change and go up higher, I'm gonna have to turn the water on harder. Gonna come back here, then turn the water up. Oh, the water's really dirty. Okay, so now maybe you can tell that the water is going higher, but what if we want it to really go up higher? What if we want it to hit against that fence over there? We're gonna have to turn it up really a lot, or we can change the hole that the water's coming out of, right? So I purposefully don't have a nozzle, I'm gonna do it with my thumb. So if I start to cover this hole, the water's gonna spray up more and higher and higher. The more I close the hole off, it'll go up higher and higher. And if I really almost completely close it, woo, it goes way up. Oh, sorry neighbors, I'll try to keep it in my own yard. You get the idea, and you know what that feels like, I'm sure. So we're thinking about volume of water, that if I turn this again like nearly completely off, we can't get the water to go up like that. There's just not enough water to do that. We can barely get it to go up. But we're also looking at water speed, because if you have a small hole but the same amount of water going through that hole, it has to go faster. So that's going to change your water speed. And then we're also looking at water angle, because if I go back to having this water on full blast and then I cover this hole, okay, it wants to spray clear over there. It wants to go really far. But if I want to change it and angle it down, all I have to do is tilt the hose down and it will go straight down to the sidewalk. So we're thinking about those three things. Remember that for your air, that you want to think about, just like with this water, you want to think about angle and volume and speed of your air. So we're gonna stop playing with the hose, I guess. The main thing that I want you to think about is when I turn the water on more, there is a little bit of an angle change, but when I cover the hole with my thumb so that the hole gets to be very small, there's a lot more change. The water has to go much faster to get through a much smaller hole. This can be applied not only to flute registers, but to playing the flute in general, because most flute players play with too big of an aperture, and if you make that hole smaller, you can be much more efficient with your air. And in the low register, it's fine to have the airspeed too, and we often want that. It's just that then all you have to do is angle the hose down to the ground, angle the air down into your flute, and you can use that same airspeed and still get your low register. Now here we are back inside, back with our flutes, but we're going to take all of the principles of the hose that we learned outside and apply them back to our instrument. So I want to show you that you don't have to do the thing where you like blow hard to get the high register. I'm going to barely let any air trickle out of my lips, but I will get the high register. The way I'll do that is I'll make the angle stay high. And what I need to do to make the angle stay high when I'm using almost no air is to make a tiny little aperture so that the hole between my lips is almost completely closed. And then we can do the opposite for the low register. I can use a lot of air. I can blow really harshly and aggressively, and I will still get the low register as long as my angle is good. That's ugly. I would never use that as a real low register sound. I'm just showing you I can put so much air through my flute and I will keep the low register as long as I don't change the angle. So a trick I like to use for angle with the low register is to tell my students and myself to aim for my elbow, my left elbow, because like those little wheels on the tool that I showed you on Amazon, it's something very concrete that you can aim for. One thing you don't want to do is cover. Flute players are so tempted to cover. If you cover the embouchure hole too much, it might feel really good and secure, but it kind of chokes off the sound. These ideas we've been talking about are honestly quite sophisticated. We're separating into 3 completely different categories: air speed, air angle, and air volume. Usually we think of those all intertwined and connected. Air speed has its origins in when you tell kids or new beginners to blow hard, how hard you blow. Air volume is how large is the hole between your lips. And then air angle will be affected by those other 2 categories. But ultimately, you control angle with your embouchure muscles. So this week, as you practice, spend time processing these ideas while you're thinking about the low register and how to deal with angling your air. There are 2 traps I want you to avoid falling into. One I already mentioned, you don't want to cover. When you cover too much to blow down into your flute, that gives us what we appropriately call a covered sound. And it also actually does just choke off the sound. You don't get as much sound that way. The other thing you want to avoid that's very common is smiley embouchure. For some reason, flute players are so tempted to smile in the low register. If you kind of pull your corners back into a smile, a lot of people do that. They feel like it gives them a lot more control. But that also gives us what we call a spread sound, because it spreads your lips and the sound suffers as a result. But there's another reason. It's not just the quality of the sound. It's also when you're doing flute acrobatics. If you have to smile every time that you play a low note, you'll see this all the time with young flute players. You'll see the corners of their lips going back and forth. If you have to do that to get the low register, you're gonna struggle always to make those leaps. We're just after stability, and it also makes a better sound. I've never heard any professional flute player ever advocate for a smiley embouchure. So if you're tempted to smile, you can think forward. You can think of saying ooh forward, or you can think of frowning and just get the stability there and don't let your corners move. This week, as you're practicing, just give yourself time and space to process all of these ideas that we've been talking about. Next week, we'll get into some really specific exercises, but this week, be sure that you're not changing your airspeed arbitrarily depending on the register. Don't let yourself back off of your airstream just because you're getting low, or tell yourself that in order to get your high register, you're gonna blow really hard. Try to do it more with angle. Think of angling straight across for the high register. Think of angling down to your elbow in the low register.